Hi, everybody, and welcome to the webinar which we've set up. It's called The New Digital Awakening. And yeah, we're very pleased to have everybody join us for this call. We've set up some very interesting discussion topics that we'll be running through. We have a great panel of experts that are going to give us their opinions and insights. We've got Mr. Arthur Goldstuck, who probably needs no introduction, but I'll hand over to Arthur in a minute to introduce himself. And we have Matt Evans, who is from Salesforce, who will also be giving himself an introduction. Myself, I'm Matt Surkont. I'm the CEO of BlueSky, and I'll be the moderator for the panel today, and we'll take you through some very interesting things. So I hope you guys enjoy it, and welcome to everyone who's joined the call. So I think we'll kick off with introductions immediately. In essence, we'll be covering some topics around client centricity. We'll be talking about some and we really want to try and make it quite a practical discussion and try to give some interesting practical insights into both the South African landscape as well as some sort of international trends that are perhaps quite interesting insights to come from Matt Evans. So Matt is actually joining us from the US. He's joined us from Utah, and I believe it's 4 a.m. there in the morning. So thanks a lot. You're looking very bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for 4 o'clock in the morning. Thanks for joining, everybody. All right, so myself, I've worked in the enterprise technology space for quite some time, for about 20-odd years or so. I've fashioned myself more in the entrepreneurial space. I've been very lucky to have some background in building out some previous IT companies in South Africa, primarily in the sort of Oracle ecosystem. And what we did probably about 5-6 years ago is we set up an early stage technology fund called Goldstuck Capital. So we've essentially done several really interesting deals, some very good deals in the early stage tech space in SA since then. And so my primary gig, though, is very much on the entrepreneurial side, and really that's the business called BlueSky. And as BlueSky, we're essentially a cloud technology services provider, boutique operation. We focus primarily on Salesforce and Amazon Web Services at the moment. Salesforce, it's our practice is a very good size. We work with a lot of the blue chip companies in South Africa. We're at the moment, I think, by headcount, the largest Salesforce practice in the business. Yeah, so we've had an interesting experience. I think it's been interesting the last few months in the COVID-19 space, and seeing the impact on the local technology ecosystem. You know, so we wanted to put together this webinar to get some really good insights around maybe not some of the more traditional impacts that a lot of people have been speaking about in terms of working remotely and communication tools and that type of thing, but more focused around the client centricity aspects of how do you start to deal with clients in this new environment, and how do you service them, and how do you win new clients, which I think is going to become a much bigger and more important trend to start focusing on. So yeah, if I could maybe perhaps just hand over to Arthur Goldstuck, if you could give me an introduction and give us a bit of a landscape and some of your observations.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate you inviting me, even though my name isn't Matt. I run a company called World Wide Worx, which conducts groundbreaking primary market research into trends that are shaping the digital landscape, mainly in South Africa, but also across Africa. We also publish an online magazine called Gadget, and that gives me access to all the breaking news from the world of technology. And we try to bring together insights from all the announcements being made, all the interviews we conduct with technology leaders, and then with the market research that we conduct. And that gives us a unique perspective on how the landscape is shifting. But right now, I think everyone is so deeply conscious of just how radically it all has changed. I thought I would give you a slightly different angle on that. And that is the theme of this webinar, which is the digital awakening. And what we found from our research, from observation and the like, is that there has been an incredible level of digital transformation over the last few months. Satya Nadella of Microsoft, in his keynote address at the Build conference recently, said that 2 years of digital transformation that they were anticipating all happened in the space of 2 months. And that really sums it up really well in terms of the acceleration of digital transformation. But our research has shown that it's a process that has been underway for a large part of this decade, and it is going to carry on for much of this coming decade. So digital transformation has been with us for 5 to 10 years already, depending on the extent to which companies have woken up to it. But what we are seeing now is not that suddenly we have a process of digital transformation, but it is that suddenly everyone is part of that transformation. And that is the radical shift that we are experiencing, that we all are having to engage in digital transformation. And that is why we call it a digital awakening. Everyone is waking up to the fact that they are part of this transformation that is taking place. And a great context for that is research we're conducting at the moment with Cisco, looking at exactly that question of digital transformation and the impact on remote working and intentions beyond the pandemic. So we asked companies, were they already engaged in digital transformation prior to this? And something like 37% of companies said yes, they were. Then we asked them, will you continue working remotely once everyone can go back to the office? And exactly the same proportion said yes, they will continue to do so. What they told us was that digital transformation went hand in hand with readiness to work remotely and to operate on digital platforms. And this we see across industries where organizations have been able to service the client and meet the client on digital platforms because they were ready to do so. And you can see the industries that were caught unprepared when they suddenly had to make a transition and change the way they operate. So you see that in banking, and you would think that banking is the one sector where everything is already digital. Most of us are banking online or via apps. But the reality is that the underlying systems are still in silos. And that is the opposite of digital transformation. That is digitization as opposed to digitalization. And what that means is that the processes underlying operations are not yet fully digital and that don't support the client journey that digital transformation demands. Client centricity means that everything is geared towards a seamless experience for the client. And we're not yet seeing that, particularly in the banking environment. You still have to fill in new forms every time you apply for a new account with the same bank that you've been doing business with for the last 20 or 30 years. That is the opposite of digital transformation. So there are many industries that still have to have that digital awakening, which means that they are focused on the client and the customer experience and the seamlessness of that experience. And that really is the scene that I wanted to set for you for today's discussion. Thank you. I'm now going to hand over to Matt Evans, who will introduce himself from a Salesforce perspective and also his perspective on what is happening currently.
Awesome. Thank you, Arthur. Really good to be with you. It is 4 in the morning here, but that's okay. Growing up, I was told early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. So hopefully that rings true. So glad to be with you. Thank you for having me, Matt, on this. Arthur, couldn't agree more with the context you set. I'm part of the Transformation Success Group at Salesforce. Now you may be wondering, Salesforce, you're a vendor of technology. All of your transformation just has to do with technology, doesn't it? But a couple of changes that we've seen in the last couple of years have really changed our mindset and our belief. Of course, we sell some of the greatest technology that exists in the world to help organizations transform and digitize, as Arthur said. But we also have seen certain trends in our industry with our customers. Arthur mentioned banking. A couple of years ago, we had a large bank come to us and say, hey, Salesforce, we're getting eaten alive by these micro loan organizations. Can you come in and can you help us invent the future of banking? And we've always had technology and we've always had implementation services for our technology, but that's kind of a different ask. Invent the future of banking. What does that mean? At that same time, we had a manufacturing company come to us and say, hey, Salesforce, we are going from a traditional kind of B to B to C company selling through retailers. We want to go direct to consumer now, B to C. Can you help us create that B to C customer experience? And we thought that's very different than implementing technology, isn't it? At that same time, we had a large airline and a large education system come to us, and they said, hey, Salesforce, we don't own any of your products, and we don't plan on buying any of your products, but you're a very innovative company. We need your help understanding how we're going to invent the future of our industries. And we thought that's very different than implementing technology. And so we're starting to be seen more and more as a transformation advisor, as well as a technology vendor. Over the last 2 years, I've met with about 90 enterprise customers in 13 countries about what transformation means to them, how they're transforming, and why they're transforming, how are cloud technologies like Salesforce a part of that. The majority of those meetings were with chief digital officers, chief customer experience officers, CIOs, chief revenue officers, the folks that make the decisions. And what we found is that technology is no longer the laggard in organizations. Technology doesn't slow you down. It's really the internal processes and operations that are starting to slow organizations down. It's that old way of working that Arthur talked about, because a lot of companies are buying these new digital technologies, but they're plugging them into existing processes and protocols that were built 30 years ago and updated 20 years ago and weren't built for the cloud. And they're not addressing fundamental issues and challenges that exist in helping organizations go fast. Things like tons of legacy systems and siloed data, not being able, capturing more data about your customers today than you ever have before, but not being able to put that data into the hands of your users and your customers at the right time. We're seeing a lack of clear structure and plan. Organizations know they need to transform, but they don't know how to do it. We're seeing business and IT not being aligned, or not, they share the same goals, but the way to get there, they're not committed to each other to make each other successful. There's a lack of skill set that exists with new technologies. It's very hard to find expensive and scarce resources that know these technologies. There's a culture resistance to change at times as well. Some banks, for example, say, we've been successful up until now. Why do we need to change to be successful in the future? So there's these pitfalls that organizations are running into that you can't just fix by plugging in a new technology. In fact, successful organizations that we found are standing up new operating models that support speed, agility, and innovation, and are driven by a high-performing culture. And that requires fundamental behavior shifts and structural shifts in things like how they fund technology, how they deliver technology with agile and responsive teams, a new digital culture that's focused on high performance, customer experience focused operating models, a human-centered change, understanding we're all people, and lean governance strategies that enable things like experimentation. So that's what I'm seeing, is that the organizations that I'm working with are starting to change maneuver, but it's the technology's gotten there, and now it's a time to change the way you work, introduce new ways of working and new behaviors. And I think that's what we're going to get into a little bit here, Matt. So I'll pass it over to you.
All right, guys, thanks so much. That was a great introduction, much appreciated. Just so everyone's aware, we are going to try and leave a 10-minute section towards the end for Q&A. So at the bottom of your screens, if you guys have any questions, please type them into into the box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be saving some time towards the end to hopefully ask some questions of our panel guests. So yeah, I mean, let's talk about client centricity. Client centricity, it's a concept I think that's been always critical and important, and it's always been absolutely vital. And I think a lot of the technology and enterprise technology discussions in the past, I think the current situation with this pandemic has obviously made it a lot more critical, and it's become a much more important discussion. In my history and my experience and background, I've been lucky enough to come through the sort of on-premise type of boom in technology, and very much in a sort of ERP type background, understanding how those systems really kind of almost start and germinate from almost from a financial general ledger type of epicenter. And what's amazing now is actually seeing these new sort of cloud-based, born in the cloud technology, platforms, essentially digital platforms like ServiceNow, Workday, Salesforce. There's a host of these incredible platforms which are making such great headway, which really do almost on the head, really, and kind of allow a business to focus their entire set of technology and operations around the customer or around an employee. And it's been an interesting retooling and interesting change in the way that we operate, and it's certainly been a fascinating part of how we work. And I think under the COVID-19 type setup and pandemic and the new set of rules, the questions start to be asked: how do we sell to clients? How do we now? We no longer have the ability to have that physical, that physical type of relationship. Clients, how do clients buy? There's a complete reshift, and perhaps not an entirely fundamental and permanent reshift, but absolutely there's been a massive change in the behavior and way that clients can be dealt with. So, client centricity, it's such a critical concept, and it has obviously become such a more important concept. And I'm really just interested, Arthur, if you could tell us some of the observations. I mean, how do clients, how do we service clients? In the past, we had the ability to service and handle clients directly in many situations, and now the landscape has completely shifted.
Thanks, Matt. We always look for the digital equivalent of the canary in the coal mine. In the old days, they used the canary to detect the escape of gases that could endanger the miners. Today, we feel that the digital canary in the coal mine is e-commerce. We can detect the gas of e-commerce invading and heralding the arrival of full digital transformation in customer service in particular. So there have been some fascinating stats that have been revealed. Nielsen, the global media monitoring company, for example, found that in South Africa, by the end of April, 37% of shoppers were shopping online, and in particular for groceries. Now that was about a trebling of the rate of what they had found before. And the fascinating thing about that percentage is it's exactly the same percentage as companies that we measured that were digitally transformed. Now that's correlation, but it's not causation. The one didn't cause the other. But what it tells us is that more than a third of enterprises and more than a third of consumers are now ready to engage digitally. And then on the flip side, in terms of the supply to that demand, we saw that retailers themselves were caught flat-footed for the large part. And in many cases, you find that the big retailers still stuck to their old way of operating initially. So you had to book a slot, for example, to have a delivery made to you. And that slot with the big guys, with Woolworths and Pick n Pay in particular, was often 2 to 3 weeks away. which is crazy when you can't get to the supermarkets and you've got to shop online. To wait 3 weeks for something to be delivered, that simply doesn't work. And very quickly stepping into that breach was all these small, nimble, agile players like Zulzi and Bottle and OneCart and Tree Suites and companies like that, using a variety of channels. Tree Suites, in fact, relied primarily on WhatsApp as their communication channel. So everyone finding a quick, easy way of communicating with the customer, of the customer reaching them very quickly, and then being able to service the customer very fast. And the surprising thing was a company like Checkers, which is not renowned for digital transformation or for digitalization or e-commerce, was one of the first to really get the act together, partnering with Zulzi and others to provide delivery in the same morning, not even the same day. And that, I think, set the cat among the canaries in the coal mine, so to speak, which really meant that everyone else also had to find ways to respond fast. Now, the idea of waiting 3 weeks for a delivery feels like it's something that happened in the last century. And in COVID time, I guess it was the last century. Over to you, Matt.
Yeah, completely agree, Arthur, completely agree. Of all of the 90 customers that I talked to over the last 2 years, every one of them is trying to focus more on customer centricity. Forrester recently did a research report that said 99% of companies are putting more focus on moving the customer to the center of their business. And so it is out there, but it's more than just front-end digital technology. And I think an experience I personally had comes to mind that really kind of lays this out. I think a couple of months ago, I had to call up my healthcare insurance provider. I think many of us have had to do that in the past. And so I set apart an hour in my workday to make that call. I dialed the number, I went through the automated system, I pressed 1, pressed 3, pressed 1, and then I got to the point where I was going to talk to somebody from customer service. And what I thought their automated system was going to say was this: all of our customer service agents are currently assisting other customers. You can either hold on the line or you can hang up and we'll call you back and you won't lose your place in queue. That's what I thought I was going to hear. What I actually heard was this: all of our customer service agents are currently in a training. Will you please call back later? I was shocked. That was unexpected. 20 years ago, I would have thought, I'm glad they're getting trained because they're going to be able to help me better. But today, my expectation as a customer has changed completely. I want service when I want it. I want it now. And I was amazed that they were not there to answer my call. Fast forward to the afternoon, I called back later and I got a hold of Kathleen. And I have to tell you, Kathleen was fantastic. I could tell she had been trained on how to create a good customer experience. The way I could tell is because the first question she asked me after I explained my situation was, Matt, how does this make you feel? And I was amazed. She was expressing empathy. She said, medical issues have a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of uncertainties. I want to make sure you feel comfortable. Here's my direct line. Call me anytime. Here's the process we're going to go through to get to a solution. It was a fantastic experience. And then at the end of the call, Kathleen said, Matt, the next step we need to take is I need you to get these documents from your doctor. And when you have them, fax them into me at this number. And I said, Kathleen, I don't know how to send a fax. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I work out of my home. I telecommute. I don't have a direct phone line come into my home. I don't own a fax machine. I know how to dial the number and how to use one, but I don't know where one is, and I kind of don't want to seek one out. Is there some other way? And that's a good example of a couple of things. One is, even though organizations want to focus more on the customer, they still have internal business processes that are prohibiting them from doing so. Things like we have to take all of our call center agents off the floor for training, and we have to tell our customers we can't answer the phone. They still have a back-end technology requirements that aren't focused on customer experience, like you have to fax in information so it can meet regulation and standards of our ERP system. So organizations that are doing this well are moving away from business process to customer experience design or human-centered design. They're moving away from systems of record to systems of engagement. And I think the best way that I can kind of sum up how they're doing this, in my opinion, is through a little analogy. But Matt, I'm going to need your help on this if you don't mind. Do you have like a pencil and paper there or something you can draw on? I'm going to have you I'm going to have you do a little drawing for us. Matt, if you
You're going to put me on the spot there now. Okay, I'll do it.
Yeah, sounds good. Why don't you do this for me? Why don't you draw for me your best 10-second rendition of a tree? And we're going to use this as a little analogy.
A
we're
tree.
going to see how good of an artist Matt is as well. And when you have it there, why don't you just show it up so everyone can see what you drew?
I didn't get an A for art in school, but how's that? Is that okay?
Well done. Yeah, well done. Awesome. Thanks for doing that. And I can tell you if you are listening at home and wanted to draw a tree as well, you'd probably draw it in the same way, this trunk with a furry ball on top. But if you look at that tree that Matt drew, there's something that's fundamentally missing from the drawing there. Matt, I asked you to draw a tree. What didn't you draw that's part of a tree?
The roots.
Yeah, you didn't draw the roots, exactly. And nobody draws the roots, so don't feel bad. Nobody draws the roots. But are the roots important to a tree? Of course they are. They provide nourishment. They provide stability when the wind blows. They help the tree grow. But if the roots are that important, Matt, how come nobody draws the roots when they draw trees?
Because you don't see them, I guess. It's underground, eh?
That's exactly right. You don't see them. And that's where the analogy comes in is most organizations approach digital transformation the same way they approach drawing a tree. They focus on what they can see. And usually what they can see are things they can feel, structure, new org charts, new processes, boxes with dotted lines between them, new strategies, new systems and tools. And they think if I just put these new processes, systems, and structures and strategies in place, we're going to transform. But what you fail to see are the cultural elements that exist, the human elements, the unwritten rules about how work happens in your organization, the behaviors that exist, the assumptions people make, and the values individuals hold dear. Because you can have the best systems and processes and strategies and structures in place, but people mess them up. And so as you're approaching digital transformation and client centricity specifically, you can not only, you can't just focus on systems and tools and strategies and structures, but you have to think about humans and getting humans to change. And that's been our experience is the best organizations are not only creating new digital technologies, but they're creating new digital cultures with people in their organizations.
Excellent insights. Thanks very much, guys. I think, certainly it's been a very interesting impact. I mean, we've got a couple of investments in the e-commerce space, and one of our investments is a online flowers and gifting e-commerce business, and we've seen a massive uptick there, almost 100% year on year uptick since June last year. Obviously, April during the hard lockdown was a very trying time for everybody in the business, but certainly the shift in e-commerce and the types of technologies that support that shift has been incredible and fundamental and very fast and very impactful. I think the old term is it's difficult to keep up with those technology trends, but certainly we've seen a massive interest and increase in the interest in technology supporting field services, supporting e-commerce, supporting sales operations and servicing operations. So I think another interesting area is also this concept of communities and technology that supports communities. It's certainly a fundamental and a very important way for us to look at how the digital technology and landscape is starting to add value to this current situation that we're in. So when I say communities, what I mean is the sort of technologies that support customers with a self-service type of operation, technology that supports employees by the same fashion. Matt, from an international perspective, I think it's fairly well known that we're a few months behind certainly Europe and the States and in terms of the pandemic proliferation What sort of experience have you guys seen in this space internationally?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I mean, customer employee communities are more important now than they ever have been before. Getting people to interact with each other as well as interact with your company is so important. We recently held a virtual conference that we usually do in Las Vegas that's huge. It's called Trailhead DX. And we did a virtual conference this year, and we had the CEO of Walmart on, Doug McMillan, and we were talking to him about how this pandemic affected him and how technology and communities has played a part in that. It was interesting to hear him talk. He said, of course, Walmart saw an immediate spike in sales, specifically of certain products like hand sanitizer or toilet paper. And they saw a need to change hours in their stores. They saw a need to improve sanitation and process in their stores. But what Doug talked about is he said he was most worried about the 2.3 million associates that worked for Walmart. He knew that if those associates weren't taken care of, then he wouldn't be able to sell product. He wouldn't be able to change what we need to change in the stores and serve the communities. He talked about how he was able to use employee communities to connect them all together to understand their current behaviors and their well-being. We recently launched a product after this pandemic came out called work.com, which is a place, a product you can buy to collect expert advice on how to make decisions with COVID data in hand. It has apps to assess employee and workplace readiness, guide reentry, do staffing, including a command center and manual contact tracing, deliver learning and wellness content to reskill employees, set up emergency response. And Doug talked about how by implementing that employee community, he was able to assess the well-being of all of his associates, keep his stores open, and keep serving the communities around them. It's interesting. There's an old Chinese proverb that says, when the winds of change blow, some build walls, others build windmills. And Doug at Walmart built a windmill. He created energy from this crisis we were in. We're also seeing this with customer communities. There's a very large telecommunications company that we work with that in 6 short months, they introduced new partner communities and customer communities to get their customers and partners talking to each other and interacting with them in different ways. In that short period of time, they were able to identify new experiences for partners and customers that they weren't aware of before. The partner onboarding experience used to be 20 days, and they were able to get it down to 1 hour just by introducing this community. And then they had a proposal process for their customers, and it took them 3 weeks to generate a proposal. Think about it. If you try to get a proposal from a telecommunications company, the next thing you do when you hang up with them is you call a different telecommunications company to get a different bid. And during those 3 weeks, they were losing customers just by creating a community, different way of engaging. They were able to take the proposal generation process from 3 weeks down to 1 day. So you got that same day proposal. You didn't have time to go get other bids from other companies. So it's becoming critically important, and we're seeing real value being generated from customer communities and employee communities. Arthur, I'm interested to see how that's affecting kind of the African region there, and what some of your research says on this.
Matt, we've seen 2 fascinating trends that have shifted during the COVID-19 period. So originally, when lockdown was first announced in South Africa by President Ramaphosa, we saw a massive level of solidarity among South Africans, everyone supporting the call, everyone being pro the president, and everyone being proud of the president and being proud of being South Africans. We haven't seen such solidarity since we hosted the FIFA Soccer World Cup in 2010, I think. And that then also went hand in hand with a heavy reliance on local service providers, local connections, local contact. So those are 2 very different trends that we saw shaping the market. So what was interesting was to see how that has shifted subsequently. So the level of social cohesion we had in the beginning is now starting to give way to some level of social backlash. People confused, people not understanding why lockdown didn't stop COVID-19 in its tracks. Most people not understanding that it was intended to delay the onset of the rush of people going to hospital and needing critical care, for example. So the result is that there's a tremendous amount of mixed messaging. And that is resulting in a social backlash, which will probably get worse over the next couple of months. So that's something that brands and enterprises have to be prepared for. And they've got to be very careful of their messaging, because they've got to understand they are now part of these communities. They are part of people's experience of not the new normal, but the new abnormal. And therefore, they've got to be sure that their messaging is not going to antagonize their customers, because their customers are communities, and these communities are now able to mobilize very rapidly. The other trend in terms of that local reliance is also moving towards local dependence, and you see more and more coming together of interest groups and communities to support those who are not able to carry on working, or don't have income, or don't have jobs. So you could argue that that is a form of charity, but in reality, it's a new kind of social cohesion that's happening, and it's a new kind of community formation that's occurring as well. And it's something that enterprises need to both be aware of and participate in. They need to support that kind of community building. And a very quick example I'll give you, freelance workers in South Africa, and that's across journalists, artists, photographers, and the like. With lockdown, I'd say probably 2/3 of them suddenly lost their livelihood overnight. And there's an organization called the South African Freelancers Association, SAFRIA, and they mobilized all their resources to try to assist those who needed work, but also simply needed food. And they have never had such incredible engagement from their community as they have had with this campaign. And now MTN, for example, has also fed into this initiative to support those who have suddenly lost their jobs or their livelihood in this particular sector. And they are suddenly seen as almost an integral part of that community, whereas in the past, they were simply this big faceless entity that people often felt antagonistic towards, as they do to many of the mobile operators. They see themselves as throwing money at the operators. Suddenly, it's the other way around. The operator is now part of the community. And I think we'll see more and more of that happening in the coming months.
Wow, absolutely. You know what they say, necessity is the mother of all invention. I think what's quite fascinating is to see how various companies and various tool sets and various products are being developed in response to this current situation. It never ceases to amaze me how you can watch how quickly certain innovative brands and companies can react to these kinds of situations at the speed, in which they do. So, you know, Arthur, what have you seen in the local landscape? What's been really impressive to you? You know, what have you seen out there where these sort of tool sets and features and functions that have come to market so quickly to be able to help us handle the current situation?
One of them relates to what you guys are doing with Salesforce, and that is Standard Bank announcing a partnership with Salesforce, for example. And I don't want to punt that product. I think Matt Evans can talk a little about that. But what I want to mention is, coincidentally, today is also the day that Standard Bank is releasing a study on what they call the platform economy. And the platform economy is essentially an economy based on organizations seeing themselves as platforms rather than just a service. And that perspective and that approach, I think, is not revolutionary, but it is transformative. And it's the kind of approach that will allow large organizations to survive this period, but also to expand and thrive. So the platform economy isn't just a cool term or a nice marketing message. It's in fact a critical element of being part of the future. So I think that is an underlying foundation, almost, that idea for the tools and the tool sets that are going to be used. But another perspective I'd like to share quickly is, if you do a search on Google Trends, that's a site where you can compare the intensity of searching for specific terms. I did one this morning on Zoom versus Netflix. And what it showed was that when lockdown began, and this is a global phenomenon as well as in South Africa, at the point where lockdown began, suddenly there was a massive spike in interest in both Zoom and Netflix. And that's to be expected. Zoom became the byword for video conferencing, webinars, and collaboration. And Netflix became the byword for staying at home and keeping yourself busy and entertained. But what was interesting was that as lockdown progressed, the searches for Zoom diminished fairly steadily and continued diminishing. The searches for Netflix started diminishing and then they spiked again. So right now, in this past few days, we are seeing interest in Netflix still rising while interest in Zoom is still falling. So what anyone has to understand in this economy is that there's a battle for attention out there, and everyone's attention at the moment is on escapism, on entertaining themselves. So if you want to avoid the Zoom fate at the moment of continually declining interest because people have a continually increasing interest in escapism or entertainment, then you really have to be clever with your messaging, with your community participation, and with your customer experience in particular, to make sure that you're not losing the customer, not just the attention of the customer as those trends showed, but also the loyalty of the customer and the activity of the customer. You've got to constantly work the system, work with the customer, and work for the customer to ensure that you don't lose them.
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing on our side too. I'm reminded, recently we did a workshop with a very large logistics and package delivery company, a global one that you all know, one of the ones that's delivering packages to your doorsteps every day. And we had to run a virtual workshop with them over the course of 3 days. It was super important to them on how they marketed and serviced their customers and understood their customers more. And we thoroughly prepared for that. We're used to doing these workshops in person, but we had to create interaction and engagement through virtual means. And it went really well. It went so well, in fact, that one of their executives reached back out to us and said, "Thank you for that workshop. Because of the workshop that you did, you showed us that we can collaborate and get everyone's opinion virtually." And so we were going to fly all of our executives on our own planes to our headquarters for our annual budget meeting, but we decided not to do that, and we decided to do that virtually because you showed us it can be done. And that's the world we're in today. It's a virtual world. At this recent conference that we had, Trailhead DX, we also announced a new product, a new offering called Salesforce Anywhere. Nearly 70% of people believe this pandemic will permanently change the nature of work, and more than 50% say that flexible work locations are very important to them. So an all digital work from anywhere world is the new normal. So you need to think about how you can service your customers from anywhere. Salesforce Anywhere is intended to do that. We came to market with it very quickly, but allows customers to sell, service, and market from anywhere and understand the customer 360. It allows people to collaborate from anywhere with a new Salesforce Anywhere app that embeds chat on fields and records in your CRM, alerts, comments, a video directly. You could be looking at a sales deal with your team, see presence of who's there, and launch a video to talk about that deal right there. Work from anywhere with an employee data model that enables you to build and manage and scale all of your employee apps quickly and upskill all of your employees with quick tools that are right in place to help you do that. But that's super important. If you're interested, go to our website. You can sign up for a pilot of Salesforce Anywhere. But I think the more important message is how are companies going to pivot themselves to work in the same way? In other words, Arthur, you mentioned Standard Bank. What's the Standard Bank Anywhere product that they're going to launch? What's the BlueSky Anywhere product that you're going to launch? How are you going to pivot to this new normal? And I think tool sets that allow for virtual collaboration, presence, understanding shared data, where you don't have to go into an office or log into a machine to access it, but you can get it on your mobile device or your tablets or your computer from anywhere, and you can work from anywhere. That's the new normal that we're heading towards, and those are the new tool sets that are going to be needed to get there.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Thanks for the comments. So the last topic I just want to bring in and discuss is maybe going to put you guys on the spot a little bit, but, future thinking, forward thinking, what do you guys, from Arthur, I think from a South African context, and Matt, certainly from an international context, what do you guys think companies should be thinking about right now and considering right now as their primary set of important goals in terms of making sure that they're successful over the next year or two?
Matt, I believe that a word that is also common in e-commerce, or a strategy that's common in e-commerce, is going to have to become a common strategy across all businesses, and that is omni-channel. So they talk about omni-channel shopping, which means that you can buy in-store or online or via a hybrid of those. Every industry is going to have to embrace the idea of omni-channel marketing, sales, and customer experience. And what that means is that they have to meet the customer where the customer is and communicate with the customer in the context that the customer wishes to be communicated. So just to take that back a moment to the stats I mentioned earlier. So right now, for example, you're seeing more than a third of enterprises and more than a third of consumers engaging digitally, mostly because they have to, but many of them discovering that that is actually a better way of operating, that they're more comfortable, it's more convenient, often more cost effective as well. So let's say for argument's sake that the level of people shopping online went from 6% to 37%, and the level of companies allowing remote working went from 6% to 37%. Once everyone can go back to normal, then a proportion of those will continue operating in this way, but a big chunk of them will go back to the old way of doing things. And I think one can assume that it's going to be a minimum of doubling over the previous version. And that would be about a 12% of companies, 12% of consumers, which is about a third of those currently doing it. It sounds like it's small. It sounds like it's back to the old ways, but it's not when you consider the fact that this is almost a doubling of what it was before. You see the same thing in e-commerce in the United States, where the projections that were made for e-commerce growth that was expected by 2025 is now being experienced in 2020. And that is expected to drop back a bit, but not by a lot. So in other words, a lot of people will continue operating the way they are, but not everyone. And that means that companies mustn't assume that we're going to go back to normal, therefore they must serve everyone in the old way, or that everyone is now digital and therefore they must serve everyone in the new way. We can see it's going to be a mix of the two. And it will no longer be that e-commerce or digital channels will be for the elite, because a large proportion of people that were in between the lower end of the market and the upper end of the market have now joined that elite. And that means that companies will have to service their customers, whether it's e-commerce or whether it's banking or whether it's enterprise services. They're going to have to service their customers in a blended way. And that is the new normal, is the blend between the old and the new, not one or the other.
Yeah, and I think about it in a very similar way, Arthur. Thanks for sharing that. A lot of your organizations, I assume, are successful. You've been successful. That's why you're joining this call, to continue to learn how to be successful. And what I'm here to tell you as I think about the future is that you've been doing brilliantly well for the environment that you're leaving. And I'm here to help you prepare and continue amazing and fantastic success in the world you're going to be in. And the way that I see that the future is kind of in three phases specific to this pandemic. That first phase that we're all kind of in right now is stabilization. Companies are trying to stabilize. They're trying to understand, are their finances going to be the same? Are their sales going to be the same? Are their where do they need to change? And they need to understand kind of how to stabilize. The next phase is going to be to reopen, just like Arthur talked about, reopen in this new world where you need to keep what you've created during this crisis and introduce back in things that you did before. And that gets you to the third phase, which is growth, doing both the old and the new. And as I think about that future, there are four things that come to mind. One of those is how you make decisions. how you can quickly make decisions. Making quick decisions is so critical for continued success in the future. That means that you need all the information gathered and at your fingertips to make those decisions. That means you need to delegate oftentimes decision-making down to the lowest possible actionable individual. And you need to establish this data culture with instrumentation and visualization and new KPIs around decision-making. The second is you need to change how you work. Like we talked about a little bit, virtual collaboration, increased productivity is critical in this new world. It will continue to be critical as people don't jump back on planes the moment this crisis is over, but they continue working remotely. That means also reopening workplaces safely, and it means upskilling and reskilling employees on these new ways of working, how to work remotely, how to work in a safe environment. The third thing is changing how you engage your customers, reprioritizing your efforts towards your customers, redesigning your customer experiences and offers based on the new needs that exist. Arthur already mentioned a lot of that, but it's a deeper personalization through digital is really what we're talking about here. And the last, and what I would probably say is the most important, is changing how you serve society as a business. A business is a platform for positive change. And if nothing else, we've seen in this COVID crisis that those businesses that are serving society are rising to the top. In other words, no longer are your customers going to come to you to buy products from you because they like your products. They're going to come to you to buy products from you because they like who you are and what you represent, and they can trust you as an organization. That means creating a culture of giving. That means civic leadership, supporting employees, communities, and governments. Critically important to include society in your corporate strategy. How you make decisions, how you work, how you engage customers, and how you serve society, I think are going to be crucial in this future that you're going to be going into.
Awesome, thanks guys. I think a very important point to finish off with there, Matt. Definitely, you know, I think Salesforce has pioneered a process called the 1% pledge. It is a pledge that BlueSky as a business we've taken, essentially represents a degree of charitable giving back. But I think personally and professionally, I think a lot of this situation, this pandemic has allowed people to take a little bit of pause, relook at the way things are done, you know, look at the way people live their lives, look at the way that people are growing their businesses and conducting their businesses. And I do think that this is an inflection point for individuals and companies to really consider the way that we conduct business going forward. You know, so thank you very much appreciated, guys. I think we do have a little bit of time left for some questions. I'm just going to open up to have a look at some of the questions we've got here. All right, so first of all, Arthur, a question for you. Which sector and in particular which businesses are leading the charge in South Africa around digital transformation, and why?
Naturally, the IT sector is in the lead because many IT companies were already looking at ways of using their own technology. And there we're talking about all the big multinationals that operate in South Africa, but also lots of local distributors as well. One of my favorite examples is First Technology, which overnight transitioned into being a digital business because its customers all needed to become remote working businesses, and they became you could almost call it the glue for those companies' digital transformation. So that's a great example of a small business doing it right. I like what some of the banks are doing. I've mentioned Standard Bank earlier and their platform economy approach, and I think that is the right attitude and the right way of thinking about it, but we'll see the benefits of those kinds of strategies emerging in the future. I mentioned Checkers with their same morning delivery service, which quite astonished me because in this country, Matt, you might be used to it in the United States, but same day delivery has been foreign to this country. Having same morning delivery is a true revolution. Take a Lot from an online retail point of view has also been incredibly innovative buying Mr. Delivery was a masterstroke on their part, because that allows them to deliver cheaply. And it's not just a question of operating digitally, but also cost effectively and being efficient both for your own processes and for your customers. And that's a fantastic example of a company that is getting that right. In terms of sectors, I think the education sector as a whole is showing the most innovation and inventiveness, because they were forced to, in terms of embracing remote learning. Not everyone is getting it right, and people are getting some parts right and some parts horribly wrong. Even the most privileged private schools have not quite grasped some of the demands that will be made on them. But it's also a sector that's going to be severely challenged in the next few years, because people will realize that working or studying from home is viable, that homeschooling actually works, because that's how kids are in many cases studying at the moment. It was seen as something weird in the past. Now it is seen as a practical reality, but also a way of schooling at far lower cost. So it's those kinds of strategies and those kinds of sectors that are going to see long-term the most benefits. The sector that's in the biggest trouble, of course, is travel. And it'll be interesting to see who wins there, because the strategies that enable travel companies to survive and thrive will be few and far, but there will also be case studies in how to recover from a crisis like this.
Brilliant. Thanks, Arthur. Very insightful. All right, I've got a question for Matt, Matt Evans. What do you believe is the single biggest sticking point to digital transformation within enterprise level companies?
Yeah, good question. Good question. It's interesting. The requirement to transform is critical right now. As you know, first impressions are so important when it comes to your company and your customer experience you're creating. COVID provides you a second chance at a first impression, because now everybody is going to come to you and see, what is it like doing business with you during COVID? And is that different? If I were to think about enterprise companies, there's always this kind of looking for this silver bullet approach. What's the one thing I can do to transform? And the unfortunate news is that there's no silver bullet, that this transformation is not something that you identify and do. Transformation is not a project. Instead, the way that we define transformation is it's 1,000 first steps. And it's taking that first step in 1,000 different ways to transform yourself. If I were to narrow it down to some of the baseline kind of enterprise level transformation tactics that act as kind of that first domino that knocks kind of everything else down, or kind of keystone trends, a couple of them come to mind. One of those is a relentless focus on customer experience. I was talking to a very large US-based company a couple of months ago, and they talked about how they were so focused on customer experience and moving the customer to the center of the business. And I said, great, who owns the customer experience at your company? And they looked around the room, they kind of shrugged their shoulders. They said, well, I think we have many people that own it. And then the CIO said, well, if many people own it, that means nobody owns it. Isn't that right? And so one of the trends we're seeing is a relentless focus on customer experience by actually identifying people that own customer experience, certain subsets of that customer experience, and doing experiments and delivering technology and capabilities around that customer experience. Another trend that I would say is a keystone trend that we're seeing is experimentation. Now, I'm not talking here about innovation. A lot of companies have these innovation spaces, but I use the term experimentation. I attended a conference where Jeffrey Moore spoke, and I loved what he said. He said, most organizations are using innovation as a form of corporate entertainment. And what they're not doing is they're not experimenting like a venture capitalist firm will on new ideas, new process, new technologies. One of the trends we're seeing is organizations are setting up experimentation labs with design thinkers that are running very short experiments, as short as 4 days, from ideation through hypothesis, through testing, through validation. And they're hiring design thinkers and prototypers and researchers to experiment. And the third trend that kind of acts as that domino effect, that keystone trend, is delivering with accelerated execution. Once you understand the customer experience, once you've experimented with that customer experience, getting that into your hands of your users and your customers as fast as you can is critical. And that means changing delivery mechanisms to agile ways of working. That means continuous delivery, continuous integration. That means DevOps, kind of all of those terms that you're familiar with, but actually making them real so that you're delivering at speed. So I wouldn't say there's one silver bullet, Matt, but I would say some of the trends that we see are relentless focus on customer experience, really an emphasis on experimenting with new ideas and creating a space where it's okay to fail and take risk, and then putting that out there as quickly as possible, being a nimble organization so you can release products like Work.com or Salesforce Anywhere within a couple of months and not a couple of years.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much. Very, very, very insightful discussion. And I think we've run out of time. So I hope everybody enjoyed it. So again, thank you to everyone who's joined, and a big thank you to Matt. Evans, thanks so much for coming, getting up in the morning so early. You can go grab your first or second cup of coffee now. And Arthur, it's an absolute privilege to have you on. I mean, I've been following your work for a long time. So it's really a privilege to have you on the call with us. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed it. And we'll certainly be sending out probably a recording. And if you guys would like to be in touch with us or be in contact, please feel free to get in touch with us.
Thanks to both Matts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, Matt. Great to talk to you all.
Cheers, guys.